Take this trash on the table and leave. You are no longer welcome in this house.
"4 years after my family threw me out of their mansion and told me I was nothing, my mother walked into my office with tears in her eyes and asked me for $50 million. She didn't know the woman sitting across from her was the same daughter she had called an embarrassment. My sister didn't know either. Neither did the man who had left me for her. They thought they were sitting in front of a powerful investor who could save their collapsing business. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments section where you are watching from, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. My name is Claire Morrison, and at 28 years old, I thought I knew exactly where my life was going. I had been engaged to Daniel for almost 2 years. We lived in a modest apartment outside Charlotte, North Carolina, and while we weren't wealthy, I believed we were building something real. I worked in operations for a small logistics company. Daniel worked for my stepfather's development firm. My younger sister, Vanessa, had always lived a completely different life. She was beautiful, confident, and accustomed to getting whatever she wanted. When we were children, I was the one who helped her with homework, covered for her when she broke things, and sat beside her bed during thunderstorms. She called me her second mother. At least, that's what she used to call me. Our mother, Patricia, had married Richard Morrison when I was 16. Richard was wealthy, polished, and obsessed with appearances. He owned apartment buildings, shopping centers, office complexes, and luxury homes throughout the Southeast. The day Patricia married him, our lives changed. Suddenly, everything had to look expensive. My old clothes embarrassed her. My part-time job embarrassed her. Even the way I spoke sometimes embarrassed her. Richard never openly said he disliked me. He simply treated me like an unwanted reminder of the life Patricia had before him. Then came Vanessa's engagement party. Patricia had insisted I attend. "She's your sister," she told me over the phone. "This is important." So I bought a dress with money I had been saving for our wedding, drove 2 hours to Richard's mansion, and arrived carrying a beautifully wrapped gift. I remember standing in the marble foyer and seeing hundreds of candles glowing against the walls. There were crystal glasses everywhere. A string quartet played near the staircase. Vanessa wore a diamond necklace that probably cost more than my car. Daniel stood beside her. At first I didn't think anything of it. Then I noticed the way his hand rested on her waist. I stared at him. He looked at me. And he didn't move his hand. My stomach dropped. "Daniel," I whispered. Vanessa smiled. "Claire, you're finally here." I couldn't speak. Richard approached from across the room. He looked at the gift in my hand and frowned. "What's that?" "It's for Vanessa." He glanced at it like it was something unpleasant. "Can someone get this trash off the table?" I thought he meant the wrapping paper. Then his eyes settled on me. I wasn't talking about the gift. The room went quiet. My mother touched his arm. "Richard." "What?" he asked. "Everyone here knows the truth." I looked at Patricia. "Mama?" She flinched. "Don't call me that here." Those words hurt more than anything else that happened that night. "What?" I whispered. "You're embarrassing Vanessa. This is her night." I looked at Daniel. "How long?" He lowered his eyes. Vanessa answered for him. "Does it matter?" She stepped closer to him. "He chose me." My hands began shaking. "You're my sister." She shrugged. "And he's my fiancé now." Then Richard laughed. "Face it, Claire. You were never really part of this family." I looked at my mother one last time. She didn't defend me. Richard continued. "Your father didn't want you. Patricia married me because she wanted a better life. Vanessa fits into that life. You don't." I felt something inside me crack. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying," Richard replied, "that you should leave before you embarrass yourself any further." I looked around the room. Every face was turned toward me. I could have screamed. I could have begged. Instead, I placed Vanessa's gift gently on a nearby table. "I'll remember this," I said. Richard smiled. "Good. Remember it from whatever little apartment you end up in." I walked out. I made it to the parking lot before I started crying. I sat behind the wheel for almost 20 minutes, unable to turn the key. Daniel called. I watched his name appear on my screen. Then Vanessa called. Then my mother. I answered none of them. Eventually, I drove home. When I opened the apartment door, Daniel's suitcase was gone. Half his clothes were missing. On the kitchen counter was a note. "I'm sorry, I never meant for you to find out like this." I read it 3 times. Then I laughed. Not because anything was funny. I laughed because suddenly, my entire life looked ridiculous. The man I planned to marry had left me for my sister. My mother had chosen her husband over me. My stepfather had just thrown me out of his house, and the people I had spent years trying to impress had finally made their opinion of me clear. I slept on the floor that night because Daniel had taken the bed frame when he moved out. The next morning, I woke up with a single thought. I had lost everything. Then another thought followed. If I had lost everything, there was nothing left to protect. 3 days later, I received a phone call from an attorney representing my grandmother's estate. My grandmother, Rose, had died when I was 16. She had been the only person in my family who never made me feel like I was too poor, too awkward, too ordinary, or too much of a burden. Before she died, she gave me a small brass key. I had forgotten about it. The attorney asked me to come to his office. I almost didn't go, but something about his voice made me curious. His name was Samuel Grant. He placed a thin folder on the desk. "Your grandmother left this specifically for you." I stared at the documents. Why didn't anyone tell me? "Because she instructed us not to contact you until you were 28. I frowned. "Why 28? Samuel looked at me for several seconds. "She said that by then you would understand the difference between needing people and choosing people." He handed me a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. "My dearest Claire," it began. "If you're reading this, then you've probably lost something you thought you couldn't live without." I stopped reading. Tears filled my eyes. "Don't be afraid of starting over. The people who love you for what you provide are not the people you should build your life around. You have always thought you were the poor branch of this family. You aren't. You are the branch that hasn't been given room to grow." At the bottom was a sentence that changed everything. "There is something else I left you. Don't spend it proving anyone wrong. Build something they can never take away." Samuel opened a safe deposit box. Inside were old photographs, business ledgers, stock certificates, and a handwritten journal. "Your grandmother was a businesswoman," he explained. I stared at him. "She sold clothing. She owned 3 companies." I blinked. "What?" He smiled. "Your grandmother was far more successful than your family ever knew." The documents revealed that Rose had invested small amounts of money into emerging businesses throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Most had failed. One had survived. A tiny technology company she had invested in decades earlier had gone through mergers, acquisitions, and restructuring. Her original shares had been converted repeatedly. The final holdings were now worth approximately $684,000. I stared at the number. It wasn't a fortune compared to Richard's wealth, but to me it might as well have been $1 billion. Samuel handed me another document. "There's more. Rose had also established a trust. I was the sole beneficiary. The trust contained additional investments and bonds. The total was just over $900,000. I couldn't breathe. "Why?" I asked. Samuel smiled sadly. "Because your grandmother believed you were capable of building something." I sat there crying. For the first time since the engagement party, the tears weren't from humiliation. They were from realizing that someone had believed in me long before I had learned to believe in myself. I could have bought a beautiful house. I could have bought a new car. I could have walked into Richard's mansion and shown them exactly what I had inherited. But I remembered Grandma Rose's warning. Don't spend it proving anyone wrong. So I did something nobody expected. I invested almost all of it. My first mistake was walking into an investment firm alone. The receptionist looked at my inexpensive suit and asked if I had an appointment. "No," I said. But I have almost $1 million, and I need someone who won't treat me like I'm stupid. A man nearby laughed. He was in his 50s, African American, impeccably dressed, with silver around his temples. That's an interesting introduction. I turned. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. I'm Reginald Brooks. He was one of the firm's senior investment advisors. He sat across from me and asked one question. What do you want? I thought about Richard. I thought about Vanessa. I thought about Daniel. I want to become so successful that nobody can ever make me feel worthless again. Reginald leaned back. Then you're not ready. I frowned. Why? Because you're trying to use money as armor. His words hit harder than I expected. Money won't heal what happened to you. If you build your entire life around proving your family wrong, they will still control you. You'll just be richer while they do it. I looked away. Then what should I build? He smiled. Something you would still be proud of if they never found out. That conversation became the beginning of my new life. Reginald agreed to mentor me. For months, I studied everything: markets, real estate, technology, business acquisitions, negotiation. I stopped buying things I didn't need. I rented a tiny apartment. I cooked nearly every meal at home. My friends thought I was becoming obsessed. Maybe I was, but for the first time, I wasn't trying to escape my life. I was designing one. My first major investment was a small commercial property outside Raleigh. Everyone told me it was a terrible deal. The building had empty offices, outdated plumbing, and tenants who were threatening to leave. I saw something else. The location was excellent. The surrounding neighborhood was growing. I bought it, renovated it, and changed the leasing strategy. 6 months later, it was profitable. Then I bought another. Then another. Reginald introduced me to a group of entrepreneurs. One of them was Elena Rodriguez, a 60-year-old real estate investor who owned properties in 7 states. She studied me over dinner. "You're angry," she said. "Excuse me? You're ambitious, but you're angry." I smiled. "Does that bother you?" "No. Anger can be useful, but only if you eventually outgrow it." Elena became my second mentor. She taught me something Reginald couldn't: how to negotiate with people who thought they were smarter than me, how to walk away from bad deals, how to make people underestimate me and use it to my advantage. 2 years after that engagement party, my company, Morrison Capital, had acquired 11 commercial properties. I had hired 6 employees. I was worth approximately $18 million. I still hadn't contacted my family. I didn't need to. Occasionally, I saw Vanessa's social media posts. She married Daniel 6 months after our breakup. The wedding had been enormous. Richard had paid for everything. Vanessa posted pictures from Europe, luxury resorts, expensive restaurants. I stopped looking. Then one afternoon, Elena walked into my office holding a folder. "You know the Morrison Development Group?" I nodded. "They're over-leveraged." She opened the folder. "Your stepfather has borrowed heavily against his properties." I studied the numbers. Why? Expansion. I looked at the documents. He's betting everything on the commercial market continuing to rise. Elena nodded. "And if it doesn't?" I looked at her. "He loses everything." She closed the folder. "Are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" "No." "Good." She stood up. "Because if you start buying his assets just because you're angry, you're still letting him control you." I didn't answer. She smiled. "That's what I thought." 3 months later, the market shifted. Interest rates rose. Construction costs increased. Several of Richard's developments began losing money. Banks demanded additional collateral. His company started selling properties. And because I had spent 2 years building relationships, I was one of the buyers. I didn't target Richard. I targeted undervalued properties. Some happened to belong to him. Others didn't. That distinction mattered to me. I bought 5 buildings, then 8, then 14. Within 18 months, Morrison Capital was worth $74 million. My family still had no idea. Then something happened that changed everything. A small artificial intelligence company I had invested in early received a massive acquisition offer. The shares I had purchased for less than $1 were suddenly worth hundreds of times their original value. My attorneys called me into a conference room. "Claire," Jennifer, my corporate lawyer, said, "you need to sit down." "Why?" "Because you're about to become very wealthy." I laughed. "How wealthy?" She turned the laptop toward me. The number on the screen made my hands go cold. My net worth had crossed $300 million. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. I expected to feel happy. Instead, I felt strangely empty. I remembered the engagement party, Richard calling me trash, my mother refusing to let me call her mama, Vanessa standing beside Daniel. I had achieved something I once believed would make all of it disappear. But the memories were still there. That's when Reginald called. "You saw the number?" he asked. "Yes. How do you feel?" I looked out the window. I thought I would feel different. He was quiet. Then he said, "That's because you finally reached the point where money can no longer distract you from what actually hurts." I didn't know what to say. "So, what now?" I asked. "Now you decide who you want to become." I established the Rose Morrison Foundation. Its mission was simple: help women rebuild after financial and family crises. We provided housing assistance, business grants, scholarships, and mentorship. Something unexpected happened. The more I helped people, the less interested I became in what my family thought of me. My success stopped being a weapon, it became a tool. 3 years after I left Richard's mansion, Morrison Capital was valued at more than $600 million. We expanded into technology, housing, renewable energy, and healthcare investments. I became known in business circles, but I avoided publicity. Then came the call. My assistant knocked on my office door. "There's an acquisition request I think you should see." She placed a file on my desk. "What's the company?" I asked. "Davidson Development Group." My stomach tightened. I opened the folder. Richard's company was in serious trouble. Several loans were due. Banks were threatening foreclosure. Investors were pulling out. The company needed approximately $50 million to survive. I stared at the signature on the final page. Richard Morrison, my stepfather. The man who had called me worthless. The man who had told me to leave his mansion. The man who had watched my fiancé abandon me for his daughter. Now he was asking for money. My assistant looked at me. Should I decline? I closed the folder. No. She looked surprised. "You want to meet them?" I shook my head. "Schedule the meeting." 2 weeks later, my mother walked into my office. She looked older, much older. The confidence was gone. She held a handbag tightly against her chest. Behind her came Richard, Vanessa, and Daniel. Daniel's face had changed. The arrogance was gone. He looked exhausted. Vanessa wore an expensive coat, but even from across the room I could see that it was several seasons old. They sat across from me. None of them recognized me at first. I had changed my hairstyle, lost weight, and developed a completely different presence. Richard began speaking. "Thank you for seeing us." I nodded. "Tell me about your company." He started explaining the financial situation. I listened quietly. He talked about assets, debt, restructuring, opportunities. Then he said, "We need $50 million to stabilize the company." I folded my hands. "And what do you have to offer?" He explained the collateral. I looked at the documents. "Your company is heavily leveraged. We're confident we can recover." "Why should I believe you?" Richard paused. "Because we've been in business for 30 years. I looked at him. 30 years is not a business plan. My mother finally spoke. "Please." I looked at her. "Please what?" She stared at me. "We need help." I nodded slowly. "I understand." Vanessa suddenly said, "You seem familiar." Daniel looked at her. I thought the same thing. My heart began pounding. Richard glanced at me. Then his eyes narrowed. I smiled. "You really don't recognize me?" My mother froze. Her eyes widened. Her lips parted. "Claire?" The room went silent. Richard stood so quickly that his chair nearly fell backward. "No." Vanessa stared at me. Daniel's face turned pale. It can't be. I leaned back in my chair. Why not? My mother began crying. Oh my God. Richard looked toward the door. You're behind Morrison Capital. Yes. The company buying our properties. Yes. Vanessa stood. You did this to us. I shook my head. No. I built a business. Your company failed because of decisions you made. You knew, she shouted. You knew we were struggling. I did. And you could have helped. I looked at her. You didn't ask me. She laughed bitterly. Because we didn't know. Exactly. Daniel finally spoke. Claire, please. I looked at him. Don't call me that like we're old friends. He lowered his eyes. I made mistakes. You didn't make a mistake, Daniel. You made a choice. My mother reached across the table. I'm your mother. I looked at her hand, then at her face. You were my mother when I needed you. You chose not to be. She began sobbing. I was wrong. Yes. She looked surprised by the simplicity of my answer. I was wrong too, I continued. I spent years thinking I needed to prove you wrong. I don't anymore. Richard clenched his jaw. So what are you going to do? I opened the folder. I'm going to make you an offer. Everyone stared at me. Morrison Capital will acquire Davidson Development Group. Richard's face went pale. For how much? Enough to pay your employees, settle the secured debt, and preserve the properties. He stared at me. And what do you get? The company. You want my company? I want the assets. I don't want your life. He shook his head. No. I closed the folder. Then the bank will decide what happens next. My mother grabbed my arm. Claire, please. I gently removed her hand. I'm sorry. Please don't do this. I looked directly into her eyes. I'm not doing anything to you. I'm simply refusing to do for you what you never did for me. The room went quiet. I stood. Meeting over. I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I felt sad. I walked to the window and looked down at the city. Reginald had once told me that success wouldn't heal the wound. He was right. I had become everything Richard said I could never be. I had built a company worth hundreds of millions. I had employees who respected me. I had created opportunities for women who were starting over. But there was still a small part of me that wished my mother had simply loved me. Not because I was successful, not because I was wealthy, just because I was her daughter. A month later, Davidson Development was acquired. Richard lost control of the company. Vanessa's marriage to Daniel collapsed shortly afterward. Daniel left with very little. My mother eventually divorced Richard. I never celebrated any of it. I didn't attend their court hearings. I didn't read the gossip articles. I didn't watch the news coverage. I had already won the only battle that mattered. I no longer needed them to regret losing me. Then, one morning, I received a letter. It was from my mother. I almost threw it away. Instead, I opened it. She apologized. Not for the money, not for Richard, for the night she had allowed me to leave that mansion, believing I wasn't worthy of love. She wrote that she had spent years trying to become someone Richard would admire and had forgotten how to be a mother. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply said, I hope one day you understand that my failure was never your failure. I read the letter twice. Then I placed it inside Grandma Rose's old journal. I never became a billionaire because my family hated me. I became successful because one day I finally stopped allowing their opinion to define me. My wealth eventually crossed the $1 billion mark after a series of technology and renewable energy investments, but by then the number barely mattered. The Rose Morrison Foundation had helped thousands of women. Some had started businesses, some had bought homes, some had simply found a safe place to sleep while rebuilding their lives. Those were the moments that made me feel wealthy. Years later, I returned to the neighborhood where Richard's mansion had once stood. The property was no longer his. I had acquired it during the restructuring, but I never lived there. Instead, I converted it into a transitional housing center for women and children leaving abusive or financially destructive family situations. On the front of the building, was a simple bronze plaque. It read, "You are not what someone did to you. You are what you choose to build afterward." Beneath it was my grandmother's name. I stood there one evening, watching a young mother walk through the front doors holding her daughter's hand. The little girl looked frightened. The mother looked exhausted. A staff member welcomed them inside. I watched until they disappeared down the hallway. Then I smiled, because I finally understood what Grandma Rose had meant. They had taken my fiancé. They had taken my place in the family. They had taken my confidence. For a while, I even thought they had taken my future. They hadn't. They had simply forced me to build a future that didn't depend on them. And that became my greatest inheritance. Not the money, not the companies, not the properties, not the billions. My grandmother left me something far more valuable. She left me the belief that I was worth investing in. And once I finally believed it too, there was nothing my family could say that could make me feel worthless again. Sometimes the people who reject you are not proof that you're unworthy. Sometimes they're simply showing you that you've been asking the wrong people to recognize your value. I spent years thinking my greatest victory would be watching my family regret what they had done. It wasn't. My greatest victory was waking up one morning and realizing I didn't care whether they regretted it at all. That was the day I finally became free. And if there is one thing I hope you remember from my story, it's this. Never allow someone's inability to recognize your worth to become the measure of your worth. You don't have to become rich to prove yourself. You don't have to become famous. You don't have to make anyone jealous. Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply building a peaceful life that no longer requires their approval. Because true wealth isn't the money in your bank account. It's waking up without needing anyone who hurt you to apologize. It's knowing who you are. It's being able to help someone else because you survived what almost broke you. And most importantly, it's understanding that you were enough long before anyone else decided to see it. If you've ever had to start over after being rejected by someone you loved, remember this. Their decision to walk away does not determine your destination. Sometimes losing people is how you finally find yourself, and sometimes the life waiting on the other side of rejection is far greater than the life you were desperately trying to hold on to.